After 22 grueling hours of labor, my husband took the birth certificate and said, "Our daughter will be named after my mother, not you." I objected, but he sneered, "You don't get a say." Then the nurse looked at me, leaned in, and whispered, "Should I tell him the truth?" My heart raced as everything around him came crashing down. They say giving birth is the most powerful thing a woman can do. No one tells you it might also be the most powerless you'll ever feel. 22 hours of labor. 22 straight hours of blinding, bone-snapping pain. My body wasn't my own. I was screaming, sobbing, soaked in sweat. My fingers clutched the bed rails so tightly my knuckles bruised. Every time I glanced over at Logan, my husband, I saw him checking his watch or scrolling through his phone. At one point, he asked the nurse if there was any way to speed things up. That should have been my first clue, but I was too deep in the pain to notice. Too trusting, too hopeful. When I finally gave one last push and heard my daughter's first cry, I thought, this is it. We're safe. We're finally here. I didn't realize that the worst part wasn't the labor, it was what happened next. Before we go further, don't forget to like this story, hit subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss what happens next. They laid her on my chest, that tiny little miracle I'd been dreaming of for months. Her skin was warm and sticky, her cry like a siren to my soul. I looked down and whispered, "Hi, Lily," because that's what we agreed on. Logan and I had picked her name over pancakes and late-night walks. Lily June. Sweet. Simple. Ours. But when I looked up at Logan, he wasn't smiling. He wasn't even looking at her. He was staring at the clipboard the nurse brought in. The birth certificate form. "You can fill this out when you're ready," the nurse said gently, setting it beside me. But Logan snatched it before she even stepped away. I was too dazed to react fast enough. My whole body was buzzing, my mind fuzzy from the pain meds and adrenaline crash. But I saw him, pen already in hand. "Logan?" I asked, voice hoarse. "What are you doing?" He didn't even look up. "Just taking care of it. She's gonna be Evelyn Grace Mercer." I blinked. "What?" "After my mom. We've already talked about this." "No, we haven't. We agreed on Lily." "I changed my mind," he said, like he was picking a different lunch order. "Evelyn is a stronger name. It'll look better on college applications. It carries legacy." "Logan?" "No. You're exhausted," he said. "Let's not argue now. Just sign it." That's when I realized. He was serious. Nurse Carla, bless her soul, was still nearby. She stopped dead in her tracks and turned to face him like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Sir, she has the right to complete this form herself." "We're married," Logan said, annoyed. "We make decisions together." "Even so, the mother is the one who signs the birth certificate. And she does so when she is fully coherent." She looked at me and gently reached for the form, reclaiming it from his hand. "Let's wait a bit." Logan tried to laugh it off, but I could see it, the flicker of rage behind his eyes. That moment where he realized someone was standing between him and what he wanted. That rage, it wasn't new. I started thinking back, remembering things I'd ignored. Like the way he changed our baby name list without telling me. I'd suggested names and he'd say, "That's too girly," or "too soft." Every single one, he rejected. Until we landed on Lily together. Or so I thought. I remembered how he asked me once, weeks before the due date, if something happened during birth, like, who would be in charge of medical decisions? I'd thought it was just anxiety. We were new parents. But now I wondered. Had this all been part of something bigger? Later, when Logan left the room to get coffee, Nurse Carla leaned in while checking my IV. "I don't normally do this," she said softly, "but I think you deserve to know." "Know what?" I whispered. "Your husband came out to the nurse's desk before delivery and asked how to register the baby under his name only. He said you'd be too tired to think clearly and that he wanted to make sure the paperwork got done the right way. He asked if there was a way to skip your consent." My mouth dropped. I didn't even know what to say. Carla continued. "I flagged it immediately. That's why I stepped in." She tucked the blanket around me gently and added, "He seems very controlling. Be careful. Don't sign anything until you've spoken to someone you trust." That night, while Lily slept in the bassinet next to me, Logan came back into the room, smiling like nothing had happened. "Chamomile," he said, offering me tea. "Thought you might want something calming." I took it, smiled weakly, and thanked him. But inside, I was watching him, memorizing everything. Because now I knew. This man, my husband, the father of my child, wasn't on my side. I didn't sleep at all that night. I watched Lily, her little chest rising and falling, her tiny fingers flexing in her sleep like she was fighting dreams. I made her a promise, right then and there. No one's going to take you away from me. Not him. Not his mother. Not anyone. And I meant it. We'd been home from the hospital for just 3 days, but everything already felt off. You know that feeling when something is wrong, but you can't quite name it yet? Like a smell in the kitchen you can't find, or a shadow in a room that looks out of place. That's how Logan felt. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't yelling or being obviously aggressive. But he was off. Too polite. Too helpful. Like he was performing the role of good husband instead of being one. He made all my tea before I could get up. He prepped bottles, laid out clothes for Lily, and even tried to arrange my postpartum therapy for me, which was strange because just weeks earlier, he'd scoffed at the idea of therapy being necessary. And still, anytime I mentioned Lily's name, he would correct me. You mean Evelyn? Let's not confuse her by switching names around. It's already in the system. Better just to keep it simple. Each comment was a splinter under my skin. I started to feel like I didn't exist, like I was a guest in my own life. And that's when I remembered the drawer. Logan had always been weird about the bottom drawer in his office. The one on the left, tucked behind his desk. Every time I cleaned, he told me not to touch it. Work stuff, he'd say. NDA stuff. But Logan worked in marketing. He wasn't curing cancer. And while I was sitting on the couch feeding Lily one morning, half asleep and replaying the birth certificate moment in my head for the 100th time, it hit me. That drawer might have answers. He left that afternoon to grab groceries. I waited 5 minutes after the front door clicked shut. Then I got up, strapped Lily into her baby seat where I could still see her, and tiptoed into the office. The drawer was locked. But I remembered something. Logan kept a ring of old keys in the nightstand, labeled with different stickers for old gym lockers and mailboxes. I checked. Found one labeled bottom L. My hand trembled as I slid it into the lock and turned. It clicked open. Inside was a manila folder, a prepaid burner phone, a flash drive, and a printed list of names. The folder was labeled Guardianship, Contingency. I flipped it open and my blood ran cold. Inside were notarized drafts. Guardianship transfer paperwork with Logan listed as sole legal guardian, should the mother be deemed mentally unfit. There were evaluation forms pre-filled with dates. A psychiatric intake form already completed for me, with fake symptoms checked off. Postpartum instability, emotional detachment, sleep-deprived, and exhibiting erratic behavior. I hadn't even left the hospital when these forms were created. There was even a cover letter drafted for submission to Family Behavioral Services, the same clinic nurse Carla had mentioned. He wasn't just thinking about taking Lily. He was planning it. The burner phone was worse. It had a short call log and 3 contacts, one labeled E, one PV Law, and one unnamed. E had to be Evelyn, his mother. I hated that I was right. I clicked into the text history. Once the paperwork goes through, she's out. I just need a few recordings to make it look clean. She won't fight it. She's too tired. She won't even know what's happening. Preston said we need at least 1 ER visit to claim emotional instability. I'll push her next week. My knees gave out. I dropped to the floor and just sat there, holding the phone and shaking. He wasn't just trying to rename our baby. He was building a legal case to erase me. I called Jenna, my older sister, and told her everything. She was at my place within 30 minutes, phone already in hand, demanding to see the folder. Her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. "This is custodial fraud," she said. "And he's faking mental illness documentation. That's criminal." "He's smart," I said. "He's calculating. He'll have a backup plan." "So do we," she said, pulling out her phone again. "I'm calling Melanie." Melanie was her friend from law school, now a family court lawyer with teeth. Jenna told me to pack a go bag, just in case. That night, I didn't say a word to Logan. He walked in with a plastic bag of groceries and 2 iced lattes, like nothing was wrong. Like he wasn't plotting to make me look insane so he could take our daughter and cut me out of the picture. "You're quiet," he said. I just smiled. "Tired." He kissed the top of my head and whispered, "I've got you." And for the first time in our marriage, I didn't believe him. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lily's face, Logan's fake smile, and that list of symptoms he'd checked off like he was building a resume for my downfall. He was smart, strategic, calm under pressure. That's what made this worse. He didn't scream. He didn't hit. He didn't threaten. No, Logan used paperwork and charm. He wore control like a tailored suit. But I had something he didn't know, the truth. And the burner phone. By morning, Jenna and her lawyer friend Melanie had compiled the documents, texts, and screenshots. We saved them to multiple encrypted drives and offloaded backups to cloud storage, just in case Logan tried to delete anything. He's got a playbook, Melanie warned me over coffee. This isn't random. These people use clinics, fake evaluations, even paid witnesses to sway court decisions. I blinked. Paid witnesses? Family members. Friends willing to lie. Especially if there's money involved. That's when Jenna pulled up the name from the guardianship folder, Dr. M. Faulkner. Logan had already listed this person as Lily's pediatrician, but we'd never discussed switching clinics. We were supposed to use Greenwood Pediatrics, where I'd pre-registered during pregnancy. This wasn't a mistake. It was a substitution. I called the number listed on the form. The voicemail didn't say anything about pediatrics. Thank you for calling Faulkner Behavioral Family Services. For family court documentation, press 1. I froze. This wasn't a clinic for babies. It was a mental health evaluation center, the kind used in custody disputes, criminal trials, and high-conflict divorces. Not only had Logan replaced the pediatrician, he'd already begun the paperwork to label me unstable. I drove there the next morning with Lily strapped into her car seat, tucked under a blanket. Jenna offered to come, but I needed to do this alone. I needed to look them in the eye. The building looked innocent enough. Quiet, beige, tucked between a yoga studio and a smoothie shop. A receptionist sat behind a wide counter, typing something on a monitor. "Hi," I said. "I'm Ava Mercer. I believe I was added to your system by someone without my consent. I need to see the file." She tilted her head. "Let me check," she typed, then paused. "Yes, you're listed as a pending client. Your partner initiated a request for intake for both you and your infant daughter. Under what reasoning?" "Family concern," she said, reading off the notes. "Behavioral instability postpartum. Notes include emotional volatility and," she hesitated, "risk of medical noncompliance." I nearly vomited. "I need this removed," I said. "Immediately. I'll need to speak with our administrator." "Good. Do it. Now." 10 minutes later, I was in a private office with a clinical director named Ms. Lambert. She was calm, professional, and surprisingly cooperative. "I reviewed your request," she said. "And after checking the documentation, I agree something doesn't feel right. Especially since no intake forms have been signed by you. Because I didn't know this was happening. You're within your rights to have your name removed. Would you like to leave a statement in the file indicating possible fraud?" "Yes, absolutely." "Would you like to file a formal complaint with the licensing board?" I paused, and then I said, "Yes." Because I knew Logan had done this before I even left the hospital. That meant this wasn't impulsive. It was premeditated. When I got back home, Jenna was pacing. "He called," she said. "Logan said you were acting paranoid, that you were turning his family against him. Did he say anything about the clinic?" "No," she said, which tells me he knows. And he's worried. That night, I recorded my own video statement. Just in case. I looked straight into the camera and said, "My name is Ava Carter. My husband, Logan Mercer, has initiated false mental health claims against me without my knowledge or consent. He's using legal systems and licensed professionals to attempt to claim sole custody of our daughter. I am of sound mind. I am seeking legal counsel, and I will not go quietly." The next day, Melanie filed an injunction to prevent any third-party documentation from being submitted without my consent. She also contacted a family services investigator and provided the burner phone text logs, the guardianship drafts, and my video statement. "Let's see how Logan feels when the legal pressure flips around," she said. I wasn't scared anymore. I was done hiding. He wanted to erase me. Now I was about to show him exactly how wrong he was. The courtroom felt like a freezer, not just because of the overpowered air conditioning, but because of the tension. The icy kind that sits in your spine and makes you sit straighter. This wasn't a criminal trial. Not yet. But for me, it was everything. I sat beside my lawyer, Melanie, who had this terrifying calm about her, like she already knew how this would go. Jenna sat behind me with Lily, holding her like she was the most precious jewel in the world. Which to me, she was. Across from us sat Logan, in his perfectly tailored navy blue suit, looking polished and professional. His lawyer, some overly confident man with slicked back hair and expensive cologne, whispered something to him just before the judge walked in. Logan didn't look at me. He looked through me. Like I wasn't even there. But I was. And I had brought everything. Judge Morales was a middle-aged woman with sharp features and zero tolerance for games. She read quickly, spoke clearly, and didn't blink once during the opening statements. Melanie went first. "Your Honor," she said, "we are here today to respond to an attempted guardianship modification submitted without my client's consent, based on fraudulent documentation and emotional manipulation." She handed over a folder. It wasn't flashy, just a clean stack of organized truth. Melanie explained the situation briefly: the forged guardianship papers, the burner phone, the clinic Logan secretly contacted, and the false mental health records. She finished by saying, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a setup. Then it was Logan's turn. His lawyer stood and smiled. "Your Honor, Mr. Mercer was simply concerned for his wife's well-being. She was exhibiting erratic behavior postpartum, and he took necessary precautions to ensure the safety of their child." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard, I tasted blood. Mr. Mercer acted as any responsible father would. And we believe that further investigation will prove. Melanie stood up again, cutting him off. "We'd like to submit one more document, Your Honor. A letter from Ava's OB/GYN and therapist, jointly signed. Both professionals have certified, under penalty of perjury, that Ava Carter is of sound mind, capable, and showed no signs of psychological distress postpartum." The courtroom went dead silent. Judge Morales took the letter and read it. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her eyes narrow slightly. When she finished, she set the letter down and looked at Logan. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "did you have any documentation from a certified medical professional supporting your claims?" His lawyer cleared his throat. "Not at this time, Your Honor. We were in the process of, so you initiated legal paperwork to remove a mother's custodial rights, without proof." Logan shifted in his seat. "I was trying to protect Lily." "Protect her from what?" "Her mother's exhaustion?" "From natural recovery after birth." She was yelling. She was forgetful. She was postpartum. "That is not a mental illness, Mr. Mercer." Boom. That was it. The judge wasn't just skeptical. She was pissed. Then Melanie handed over the last page. "Your Honor, if I may, this is a transcript of text messages between Mr. Mercer and his mother, Evelyn, discussing how to fabricate concern for Ava's mental health in order to gain full custody. It also includes phrasing such as let her break down in front of a nurse and start documenting things that sound dangerous." Judge Morales raised her eyebrows. "Did you coach your husband on how to make his wife appear unstable?" Melanie leaned in. "There's also a memo suggesting Logan push for a medical incident that could be used to justify a psychiatric hold." Logan's lawyer tried to object, but the judge held up her hand. "That'll be enough." What followed was a ruling so clear, it felt like sunlight after weeks of storm. Emergency custody is hereby granted to Ava Carter, effective immediately. Mr. Mercer is barred from making any unilateral decisions regarding the child's welfare or health care until further notice. A forensic evaluator will be assigned, and any attempt to manipulate future documentation will result in criminal referral. Logan didn't react at first. Then his jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists. He didn't see it coming. He thought I'd roll over. But I didn't. When we left the courtroom, I felt like I could breathe again for the first time since Lily was born. People always say winning custody is about the child's best interest. But what they don't say is that it's also about surviving the games people play to pretend they care. The house felt like it had grown colder in my absence. It had only been a few weeks since I left with Lily, since I'd moved into Jenna's spare room with nothing but a diaper bag, a go bag, and trauma etched into my spine. But when I walked back into that house, key in hand, heart pounding, it was like walking into a museum of a life that no longer belonged to me. It smelled the same, cedarwood and laundry detergent. Everything was perfectly in place. Logan's obsessive neatness, his pristine white coffee mugs, the folded blankets on the couch. But it was too quiet, too still, too clean. Jenna had offered to come with me. Melanie too. But I needed to do this alone. I had court-ordered full custody of Lily. The temporary protection order against Logan had gone through, and the forensic investigator had already scheduled their first visit. Things were moving, but I still hadn't closed the loop. Not completely. I needed to go back, not just for the rest of Lily's clothes and my things, but for answers, for closure, for whatever Logan hadn't wanted me to find. I started in the nursery. The crib was still there, untouched, like a museum exhibit frozen in time. The pastel mobile we'd picked out together still spun slowly from the ceiling fan's breeze. The closet was full of baby clothes, tags still on half of them. That's when I noticed it, the baby book. It was sitting on the dresser, open. Inside were notes Logan had written. First bath, 6:35 p.m., January 12th. Sleeps best with white noise, my playlist. Doesn't like when Ava holds her too tight. My throat closed. These weren't shared memories. These weren't sweet observations. They were records. Observations. Documentation. Every comment was written like a case note, and all of them subtly pointed to me being distant, struggling, dangerous. I left the nursery and went to the office. The drawer I'd once broken into is now empty. Cleared out. Logan was too smart to leave that kind of evidence around twice. But that wasn't the only drawer in the room. I started pulling open every cabinet, file organizer, and inbox tray. Most were just bills, warranties, random junk. But then, in a leather folio tucked in the bookshelf, I found something I hadn't seen before, a second flash drive. No label. Just a small, matte black drive like the first one I'd found weeks ago. I plugged it into the old desktop. There were 3 folders, video logs, recordings, asset plans. My heart stopped. I opened video logs first. What I saw made my skin crawl. There were 4 videos, all short, all clearly filmed without my knowledge. One showed me crying in the kitchen at 3 a.m., holding Lily. I remember that night. It was our 3rd night home, and she wouldn't sleep. I was exhausted. I cried quietly into her hair because I didn't want to wake Logan. But he'd been awake. He'd been filming me. In another, I was talking to Jenna on the phone, venting about how overwhelmed I felt. Nothing malicious. Just being human. Being honest. And he'd recorded it. I clicked on the recordings folder. It was worse. Audio files of our arguments. Our conversations. Snippets of me venting, snapping, sighing too loudly, but spliced together in a way that made me sound unhinged. Carefully edited. Timed. Labeled. Exhibit A, unstable tone. Exhibit C, indirect threat. It was like Logan had been building a portfolio for months, waiting for me to break just enough that he could swoop in and finish the job. He didn't want to win custody. He wanted to erase me entirely. The final folder was labeled Asset Plans. I expected spreadsheets. Instead, it was emails. Messages between Logan and his mother, Evelyn. They were discussing property transfer, moving accounts, separating finances. Once the guardianship goes through, we can sell the house. Freeze the joint account after she's evaluated. Use safety language if she resists. She doesn't know we already shifted the emergency fund to my solo account. Let's keep it that way. I stared at the screen, every hair on my body standing on end. This wasn't just betrayal. This was financial abuse, legal manipulation, and emotional war, all wrapped in a smile and served like a business plan. I copied everything, downloaded every file, backed it up, emailed Melanie, texted Jenna, saved a second copy to a cloud drive. Then I deleted all traces from the computer. By the time I stood up, I felt hollow, like my spirit had temporarily stepped outside my body just to survive the horror of what I'd seen. But I wasn't done. There was one last thing I needed to do. In our bedroom, tucked in the corner of the walk-in closet, was a fireproof lockbox. I'd forgotten about it. Logan had always said it was just insurance forms. I opened it. Inside was a small stack of documents. and one sealed envelope with my name written on the front in Logan's handwriting. I opened it. It was a letter, not an apology, not a confession, but a farewell. By the time you read this, I assume everything has come out. I want you to know I did what I thought was best. I could never let you raise her the way you were becoming. I couldn't watch her fall into the same weakness I saw in you. I dropped the letter. I didn't need to read the rest. I didn't care what he thought he saw, because I knew what I saw. The lengths some people will go to feel powerful when they're really just afraid of a woman who's finally stopped playing small. 3 weeks later, I stood in line at the county registrar's office with Lily in my arms. She was heavier now, still small, still fragile, but holding on to me like she knew I was her world. And she was mine. Her tiny fingers were curled around the fabric of my shirt, her little head tucked beneath my chin. Everything had changed since the last time I held that clipboard in the hospital. And now, this moment was for us. My name was cleared. The court had officially terminated Logan's temporary custodial rights pending full investigation. The judge approved a protection order for Lily and me. The court-appointed forensic evaluator's report had confirmed everything: Logan's manipulation, the forged paperwork, the recordings, even the financial deception. Melanie was already helping me pursue criminal charges. Evelyn had gone quiet after the emails came out. Her silence was probably the smartest thing she'd done in all this. But this was something only I could do. Next, the clerk called. I stepped forward, holding the folder of paperwork in one hand and Lily in the other. "Hi, I'm here to submit a correction to my daughter's birth certificate," I said. "Mother's name, Ava Carter. Father." I hesitated, then smiled softly. "Not applicable." The woman blinked but didn't ask questions. She just nodded and continued typing. "And the child's name?" I looked down at Lily, who was blinking up at me, wide-eyed and content. "Lily Eleanor Carter." I didn't flinch, didn't stutter, didn't look around to see if someone would object, because there was no one left to take this away from me. The woman typed for a while, clicked through a few screens, then said, "It's been updated. You'll receive the new certificate in the mail within 10 business days." "Thank you," I whispered. I took the receipt, nodded politely, and turned to leave. As I stepped out of the building into the sunlight, I let it warm my face. The cold that had been in my bones since the day Lily was born, since that hospital room, was finally melting away. We had a long road ahead. Therapy, legal cleanup, financial repairs. But Lily and I were free. I wish I could say Logan disappeared from our lives entirely. He didn't. There were hearings, investigations. But he never got near Lily again, not without supervision, and even then, it was temporary and limited. Once the DA got involved, the real storm began. Turns out, Logan's history with manipulating documentation extended into his business life too. Melanie had a field day with that. Eventually, he lost more than custody. He lost everything. But I wasn't there to celebrate that. I didn't need revenge. I just needed peace. One day, when Lily is old enough, I'll tell her what happened. Not all the ugliness, not at first, but enough to show her what it means to fight back, to stand up, to protect what matters. And I'll make sure she knows this, that her name was never a mistake, that her mother didn't let anyone rewrite her story, that even in the darkest hour, love and truth can still win. So here we are. My name is Ava Carter. I am a mother, a survivor, a woman who was nearly erased and who came back stronger. This is my story, and Lily's, and no one will ever take that from us again.